Hello, everyone. My name is Spencer Welsh. Welcome to today's show. We have a good one for you, as always. But, it is a little bit of a day that, we don't normally do a show. Felt like I could do this show today, and also I have not really been doing that many shows as of late, so I thought it'd be kind of fun to, sit down, do this show, have a little bit more relaxed. And we do have a good story for you a little bit later about a war going on apparently at Stanford. I've never heard of it. It's to California College, and apparently there's a war going on there. And a sophomore has written a piece about it for The Atlantic. So this is somebody, who's a current sophomore in college, older or younger than me, who's writing thousands of words on this in The Atlantic, one of the premier liberal magazines. And it's all about, Zionists versus pro-Palestinian activists and all that. We'll break that stuff down. It should be a pretty fun one. But I do want to start, though, with some big news to do with Donald Trump. As we have, not really talked about this in the show, too much, but especially in light of some of the poll movements that we talked about at the end of yesterday's show, I do think it's definitely worth looking into. Really, just the one of the biggest detriments, one of the biggest possible setbacks that Trump could be facing in his run for office, which is his trials and exactly what happens when he gets convicted. And there's been some polling that says the classified documents case, getting convicted on that would hurt him the most, which I find to be really weird because Joe Biden has had that same thing. So I think that take that polling with a huge grain of salt, and I think that it's going to be a really just first come first serve basis. We're going to have to see how it lands, but having this trial going on, or having really any trial going on during the election period, is not going to be in any way a good thing for Trump, because the general election is over. It helped Trump with the primaries a lot. It helped him rally the base. It helped him, convince people that, Trump, that he is being targeted by the mainstream and by the establishment. That was incredibly impactful in terms of marshaling support, unifying the base, and making him just essentially look like that dude, the dude that everyone wants, but it essentially wants to go after. So the New York judge presiding over one of Donald J. Trump's criminal trials, though, this is the hush money case, I believe, the Stormy Daniels hush money case, barred him from attacking anyone in the case. It was a pretty narrowly tailored gag order that hewed closely to the terms of an order that was upheld by a federal appeals court in Washington ahead of Trump's other criminal cases. And in seeking the gag order last month, and by the way, this does kind of help Trump because he can't attack all the people as being a witch hunt for him. So that's going to hurt him politically. Being able to do that, being able to get out on the trail and use his megaphone and his limited on Truth Social reach to attack. But big in conservative media to attack some of the prosecutors, like that was definitely something that did help him a lot. And the judge is like, you're a normal person, you're going to have to go to trial. You can't actually do this, successfully. You're not going to be able to get away with it. But he is allowed to attack Alvin Bragg. He is not yet prohibited from attacking Bragg, who has received numerous death threats over the recent months. Apparently 3 other criminal cases against him are currently mired in delay, but this Manhattan, if you really, think all the way back, I know it's a long time ago, but it's essentially about Stormy Daniels and him not declaring the hush money that he paid to Stormy Daniels as what it was, which was in the eyes of this case, it was a, campaign donation in kind that Trump did not register, and it's a real kind of a stretch. It's called by multiple people like the stepchild case, but every other case is mired in problems. Like the Georgia case essentially was ruined, and again, this is something that we didn't talk about, by the fact that the lead prosecutor down there, Fannie Willis, was kind of caught having an affair, and she hired the person that she was having an affair with to be a prosecuting attorney and paid him $100,000 in salary and reimbursements, from the state pockets, going to, her lover, kind of undisclosed. It's a conflict of interest that's pretty big. And essentially she had to get that guy off the trial. And he was, one of the biggest prosecuting attorneys on that. And that, obviously sets up a whole new delay. And now, Trump can also appeal to say, that's not enough. I want to get Fani Willis off this case, period. So that could be delayed even more. And that's the case where, the perfect phone call case where Trump called, Georgia, the Secretary of State there in 2020, and be like, find me 11,000 votes. So it is, a lot of bad news is going on, for Trump. But I think but he also has been able to delay very successfully some of the cases that would be the most impactful to him. The classified documents case is another example of this. In Florida, I believe this is the one where there's just a Trump-appointed judge who is essentially slow-walking everything and allowing, playing ball with Trump's legal team when they try and delay in a pretty big way. So that's how that one's getting delayed. But you also have this Georgia one, and then you have the Manhattan one going ahead. But I do think the Manhattan one could, a lot of people in kind of the media sphere are dismissing this as a little bit as like, it's such a ridiculous case. But if that's the only one and it's going on, it's supposed to start April 15th. It's going to be going on. It's going to be peppered out in the news for some of the key choosing times, the convention in the summer, as we get closer to November. Oh, Trump had this trial. Trump had this, Trump had that. And it's going to go, you have these deliberations. You're going to have, I don't know if you have a verdict before the November period, but it's kind of too early to tell, obviously, that because, trial has not even started. But it has, having that on is going to be probably one of the worst things that Trump has going for him in this election, because people don't like getting reminded that he's a criminal. If they just get reminded every day that Joe Biden, this is what it comes down to. Do they get reminded that Joe Biden's old, or do they get reminded that Donald Trump's a criminal? So that's essentially what we have to work with. And the slight uptick, I think, in polls for Joe Biden recently has been largely attributable to the fact that many people are viewing Donald Trump, are seeing Donald Trump more and more for what he is, alongside seeing Joe Biden for more than what he is. And it's just this kind of, again, as I said, and we're going to probably keep coming back to this all the way until November, which is going to be of the people that hate both candidates, which is going to be a sizable amount of those people. Who do they vote for most? And that's going to be who won. And in 2020 it was Biden. I think even in 2022, or recent polling, it's still been Biden. So that's probably his best asset right now, in the fact of a lot of other ones. But that will be an incredibly, incredibly deciding factor down the road. All right, let's go down to let's go to the one I've been looking forward to. I will be honest, I don't know if I can read this. It's so long. It's like when you scroll on an article, you're like, "Oh, this is a small kind of sidebar scrolling thing." So this is a guy who is a sophomore at Stanford, who, full year younger than me. Not saying that I'm jealous anymore or anything. It's an incredibly hard industry to break into. But this guy got, 5,000 billion words published in The Atlantic. And he also won an award. Oh, wait, what's his name? It's Theo Baker, son of top New York Times journalist Peter Baker. Oh, okay. He just must be a really good journalist then. He must be, tip-top. Well, we'll find out, because we're going to read this right here, right now. One of the lead section, this is already we're off to an amazing start. One of the section leaders for my computer science class, Hamza El Boudali, believes that President Joe Biden should be killed. And again, this is the reaction that they're expecting, and many Atlantic readers will have. I know many Atlantic readers in my life. But it's so funny that they start off with this. It's like a section leader for a random son of an elite journalist's computer science class believes that President Joe Biden should be killed. I'm not calling for a civilian to do it. I think, and this is, again, he's like a 23-year-old, so this is a person whose political opinions are being broadcast to the the premier magazine in America because, again, they're really, really important. It's beyond belief. It's just like, and also it's just like, if you talk to a lot of young voters, this would be a sentiment, especially those who are incredibly repulsed by what's happening in Gaza. This would be a sentiment, maybe not in those exact words, but this would not be a sentiment that's laughed out of the room. He said, "I'd be happy if Biden was dead. He thinks Stanford is complicit in what he calls the genocide of Palestinians, and Biden is not only complicit, but responsible for it. I'm not calling for a vigilante to do it," he later clarified. "I'm saying he is guilty of mass murder and should be treated in the same way that a terrorist with darker skin would be. And we all know terrorists with dark skin are typically bombed and drone strike by American planes." Okay, where's the lie? So again, he's trying to get this guy, TA for his computers. It's just so insufferable. The fact that this person, imagine his conduct in class, and just being and then tattletaling to the teacher, but instead the teacher's the Atlantic magazine. Abudali said that he believes that Hamas's October 7th attack was a justifiable act of resistance and that he would actually prefer Hamas rule America in place of its current government, though he later clarified that he doesn't mean Hamas is perfect. When you ask him what his cause is, he answered, "Peace. I switched to a different computer science section." Israel is 7,500 miles. Again, it's just there's all this, this seething anger that's supposedly passed off as journalism, the seething anger at any Palestinian students expressing any opinion other than, I just want to see more aid to Palestinian civilians, and I'm thankful for President Joe Biden negotiating a ceasefire, and Israel's actions have been over the top. Any opinion to the, left of that, I guess, is considered absolutely unacceptable throughout American society, and you will be canceled. Again, this is real cancel culture right here. Again, this is what we're dealing with. Israel's 7,500 miles away from Stanford's campus, where I am a sophomore. But the Hamas invasion and Israeli counter-invasion have fractured my university, a place typically less focused on geopolitics than on venture capital funding for the latest storm-based tech startup. Few students would call for Biden's head, I think, but many of the same young people who say they want peace in Gaza don't seem to realize they're in fact advocating for violence. Oh, really? It's just like you're talking to people who are older than you, who have been around for longer than you, who are closer in this to this situation than you in every single possible conceivable way. But you have this smug arrogance in your tone in terms of talking down to them. In fact, they're saying they don't really mean they advocate for violence. It's just it's a completely, even if you're a white American like me, you have every single right to be just as outraged by this killing, by this slaughter, by this genocide than anybody else, as anybody else, because your government is taking your tax dollars against your will and funneling it. There's been over 100 weapons transfers since October 7th alone, and I mean, if not calling that out, in my opinion, and again, it's just me here, that sounds like you're advocating for violence, but I don't know. For 4 months, two rival groups of protesters, separated by a narrow bike path, faced off on Stanford's palm-covered grounds. The sit-in to stop genocide encampment was erected by students in mid-October, even before Israeli troops had crossed into Gaza, to demand that university divest from Israel and condemn its behavior. Protesters were hung. Protesters not hung yet. Were hung equating Hamas with Ukraine and Nelson Mandela. Again, it's like it's like you're gonna root out everyone who puts up a crazy poster on a call, and also again, all this stuff is talked about in the Atlantic, one of the premier national American magazines. Across from the sit-in, a rival group of pro-Israel students eventually set up a blue and white tent to provide, as one activist put it, a safe space to be a proud Jew on campus. And again, it was it's the idea that on American college campuses, Jews have no safe space, they have no outlet. Compared to Palestinian students, can only be seriously said by someone who has never been on American college campus in at least the last 20 years for longer than 2 weeks. It's just, I'm not even going to go into it, but it's just nonsensical to anyone who's been around there. Some say dueling encampments would only some days. Sorry, the dueling encampments would only host a few people each, but on a Sunday weekday afternoon there could be dozens. And again, I think some of this encampment stuff on the college campuses on both sides of the aisle is a little bit with college liberals. You're always going to have the same thing. College students in general, you're going to have valid accusations of just performative activism. But I do think that it's not something worth hanging these college students over, in the Atlantic, the fact that they're maybe being a little bit performative, a little bit overly dramatic. I think it's a much broader, I think it's a symptom of a broader problem that there is no group in society with any power to actually influence events. So they just are, besides, I guess, kind of establishment liberals at the moment. So there's just various kind of impotent expressions of powerlessness and raging at the fact that people are so powerless, again and again. And that's what I think this represents for, college leftists who are horrified, justifiably so, as I would consider myself in this group, of what's going on in Gaza. But most of the times, the groups tolerated each other, but not always. So students on both sides were reportedly spit on and yelled at and their belongings destroyed. The perpetrators in many cases seemed to be adults who weren't affiliated with Stanford, a security guard told me. It's really top reporting there. The university put in place around-the-clock security, but when something actually happened, no one quite knew what to do. Stanford had a policy barring overnight camping, but for months didn't enforce it out of a desire to support the peaceful expression of free speech in a way that students choose to exercise that expression. Again, we also have these very back and forth, kind of like selectively enforced university policies that are always used to, create this horrific, demonization of Palestinian supporters at any turn, as I'm sure we'll see if we, keep reading. And the administration, again, told the alumni, because the university feared that confronting the students would only make the conflict worse. The student, again, the idea that any university has fears confronting students is just not evidence or backed up by anything that Stanford's done, or by the way that any university has done across America since this whole thing started. We don't want no two states, we want all 48, students chanted, a slogan advocating that Israel be dismantled and replaced by a single Arab nation, because that's what's advocating there, which is really, again, it's really great. Also, by the way, it's pretty much, Likud party policy, and has been since, 1980s, when I think the Likud party was founded, that they, want all 48, and is something that all of 48, referring to Israel's 1948 borders. So it's not, something that's that revolutionary. Kind of an iteration on that to the river to the sea, from the river to the sea, kind of fear-mongering there. So we've had protests in the past, said Richard Saller, the university interim president, told me in November, about the environment, the apartheid in Vietnam, but they didn't pit students against each other the way the conflict has. I've spoken with Saller. By the way, this is crazy. The fact that you can just walk in and speak with the university president, like, I've worked in my university student journalism. I've worked in a little bit of, student activism. The president of my university and the president of pretty much any other university I've had, I've ever come across is incredibly, incredibly inaccessible. But then this guy's just walking in and speaking with the president, Richard Saller, of this university, Stanford, a few times over the past 6 months in my capacity as a student journalist. So again, it's just, there must be something really different going on at Stanford. And Richard Saller is probably just a very nice guy. We first met in September, a few weeks into his tenure. His predecessor, Mark Tessier-Levine, had resigned as president after my reporting for the Stanford Daily exposed misconduct in his academic research. Tessier, jerking himself off about the reporting. In the first conversation, Saller told me that everyone was eager to move on from the Tessier-Levine scandal. He was cheerful and upbeat. He knew he wasn't staying in the job long. He hadn't bothered to move into the recently vacated presidential manor. In any case, campus at the time was serene. Then, a week later, came October 7th. The attack was as clear as a litmus test as anyone could imagine for the Middle East conflict. Hamas insurgents raided homes and a music festival with the goal of slaughtering as many civilians as possible. Some victims were raped and mutilated. Several independent investigations have found, to bring in a little bit of facts on this, UN has found that there is some circumstantial evidence of rape. I think it's very, very fair to say that rape happened and was committed by Hamas members on that day. But I think it's also important to say that there is no evidence of systematic rape, as has been often claimed by Israel supporters and their defenders. Hundreds of hostages were taken into Gaza, and many have been tortured. This, of course, was bad. Saying this was bad does not negate or marginalize the abuses and suffering Palestinians have experienced in Gaza and elsewhere. Everyone of every ideology should be able to say that this was bad. Again, so it's just like a straight up, kind of liberal Zionism editorializing there. But much of the campus failed this simple test. 2 days after the deadliest massacre of Jews since the Holocaust, Stanford released milquetoast statements marking the moment of intense emotion and declaring deep concern over the crisis in Israel and Palestine. The official statements did not use the words Hamas or violence. It's just straight up whining about like a university statement that didn't, straight up call for Gaza to be wiped off the face of the earth and every single person possibly suspected to be in Hamas to just be straight up slaughtered and, offer full support and pledge full loyalty to Israel at this time. It just like, and again, if you're aware of, at least in some way, Palestinian suffering, is that not an appropriate thing to make reference to, in a statement about the issue? I guess it's not for, the greatest friend of the Palestinians here, Theo Baker. This should not be, I really do think this should not be viewed as a journalism so far, and I haven't read the whole thing, but this should not be viewed as a journalistic piece, this should be viewed as, doing a limited amount of snooping and then just editorializing for a bunch of words and having it get printed in the Atlantic because, just because he's a really good journalist. Nothing to do with what his last name was whatsoever. I would never imply any sort of allegations of nepotism or anything like that because his father is Peter Baker of the New York Times. But, and again, he is a college sophomore. During a mandatory freshman seminar on the 10th of October, a lecturer named Amir Loggins tossed out his lesson plan to tell students the actions of the Palestinians were military force, that the actions of the Palestinian military force were justified and that Israelis were colonizers and that the Holocaust was overemphasized according to interviews conducted with students in the class. Okay. Loggins then asked Jewish students to identify themselves. He instructed one of them to stand up, face the window, and he kind of kicked away his chair, a witness told me. Loggins described this as an effort to demonstrate Israel's treatment of Palestinians. Loggins did not reply to a press for comment. A spokesperson for Stanford said there were different recollections of the details regarding what happened in the class. And then something about the fact that there being different recollections about what happened in the class, somehow that doesn't surprise me about just judging on what I've heard from, again, in my university, there's similar stuff that happens like this sometimes in my university as well. There is oftentimes, again, to put it nicely, different recollections of what happens in these kind of events. We're only in our third week of college, and we're afraid to be here, 3 students in the class wrote in an email that night to administrators. This isn't what Stanford is supposed to be. The class Loggins taught is called College, short for Civic, Liberal, and Global Education, and it's billed as an effort to develop the skills that empower and enable us to live together. Loggins was suspended from his teaching duties. An investigation was opened. This angered pro-Palestinian activists who organized a petition that garnered more than 1,700 signatures contesting the suspension. Again, honestly, I think it's a very important oversight that to have oversight of that investigation, and I'm sure it clearly, again, the way he tells it is not in any way. He doesn't even bother. Even if you're trying to do a piece that, slants to a certain angle, and you're coming at it from a certain perspective that this guy clearly is, you at least in some way have to say, well, the Palestinian side say this, and maybe even here's why it's wrong. You set another piece of evidence why this is wrong. Again, you just conducted interviews with students in the class. Again, I would be willing to bet $1 billion that none of the students were sympathetic towards the Palestinians. And then you get this kind of framing here, which makes it seem like, it was crazy that the Palestinian activists would ever do these signatures. Would I be willing to bet there's a little bit more to the story, as this Stanford statement, again, literally the university statement says, there was different recollections, and they suspended the guy. Yeah. And you talk about saying someone, I don't condemn Hamas. Like, you ask us, do we condemn Hamas? Fuck you. That's what one of the persons, apparently a student at a protest said. David Palumbo Liu, who is a literature professor with a focus on post-colonial studies. Again, we're just getting like this. It's such a insular kind of article to write in the first place. It's like, if I wrote, again, it's like the idea that could I write an article that was in any way kind of doing this from the other side, from the pro-Palestinian side, and have it just submitted to the Atlantic. It's just ridiculous on its face. So yeah, Palumbo Liu, he said, I asked him if he could elaborate on what he said about the event of Palestine's native population, talking about European settlers that had come to replace Palestine's native population, which is something that did happen. I think if he denies the fact that there were also a bunch of Mizrahi Jews there, that would be just factually incorrect. But I don't think he's going to do it. He said, this is one of the discussions that could go on forever. Like, who is actually native? At what point does nativism lap? Well, you haven't been native for X number of years. So in the end, he said, you have two people who both feel they have a claim to the land. They have to live together. Both sides have to cede at something. Again, sounds like, an absolute crazy person. Yeah. So the struggle at Stanford, he told me, is to find a way in which open discussions can be had that allow people to disagree. It's true that Stanford has utterly failed in its efforts to encourage productive dialogue, but I still find it hard to reconcile DPL's words with his public statements on Israel, which he had recently said on Facebook should be the most hated nation in the world. Again, just like, it's, again, he said, when Zionists say they don't feel safe on campus, I've come to see that they no longer feel immune to criticism of Israel. He continued, well, as the saying goes, get used to it. Again, essentially saying that it's, if hearing criticism of Israel, like, it apparently is very true here for Theo Baker, makes you feel unsafe, then it may be a tough period of time for you as Israel is committing this genocide. Again, this is, and he's acting like a country that, again, this is like in some kind of war. This is in some kind of, it's a two sides conflict. It's a tough situation. Israel's doing the best it can, and he's acting, so surprised from all this, a professor saying that Israel should be the most hated nation on earth, when it's like they're literally accused before the International Criminal Court of a plausible genocide. And you see all the things that happen every day, all the civilian deaths, all that stuff, and you think, oh, they're just, we shouldn't be too mean to them, right? None of this anger is a little bit too much. It's ridiculous. He talks about, kind of the recent surge of derogatory harassment towards Jewish people, which is, no one, I think, should be denying that or, downplaying that in any way. But then, of course, on the other hand, you cannot be denying the fact that there is also, I would say, less protected, increased attacks also on less protected Muslim students. For example, the people in Colombia who got sprayed with that, skunk spray by people who had just come back from IDF reserve duty in Israel, very, very recently, and nothing was really done about that. I think, you got to mention those two things in the same breath. He says, protests began before this panel discussion, was one of, with the president, before it even started, with the activists lining the stairs leading to the auditorium. During the event, they drowned out the panelists, one of whom was Israel's special envoy for combating anti-Semitism, by demanding a ceasefire. After participants began cycling out into the dark, things got ugly. Activists, their faces covered by keffiyehs or medical masks, confronted attendees. Go back to Brooklyn, one young woman shouted at Jewish students. One protester who emerged as the leader of the group said that she and her compatriots would take all of your places and ensure Israel falls. Again, this is where we get to some of, the ridiculous, like, kind of ill-informed, kind of, performative activism and just, like, crazy displays of impotence and just, like, unproductive rage, I guess is what you would say. She told the attendees to get off our campus and launch into conspiracy theories about Jews being involved in child trafficking. As a rabbi tried to leave the event, protesters pursued him, chanting, "There is only one," the classic chant, "There is only one solution, Intifada, revolution." At one point, some members of the group turned on a few Stanford employees, including another rabbi, an imam, and a chaplain, telling him, "We know your names and know your work." Again, this is... I would also, by the way, I would love to, maybe it's all recorded, maybe there's videos of this, all this stuff, but I would love to see, some of the sources on that. Soller, he apparently avoided the protest by leaving through another door. Early this morning, his private residence, private residence had been vandalized. Protesters frequently tell him that he can't hide and shout him down, saying, "We charge you with genocide," they chant, demanding that Stanford divest from Israel. When asked whether Stanford actually invested in Israel, a spokesperson replied that beyond small exposures from passive funds that track indexes such as the S&P 500, the university's endowment has no direct holdings in Israeli companies or direct holdings in defense contractors. And again, so I think that you have, again, it's kind of, unproductive, I guess, in a certain way to go, issue by issue by this. But I would say that it's like, have they actually released any sort of documentation proving that? I think, just if that's so true and you're something you're so proud of, I think transparency should be something that would be, really no problem there. It kind of goes down talking about more incidents, and these protest tents finally being removed. And another meeting, talking about his meeting with Soller. Did Stanford have a moral duty to denounce the war in Ukraine, for example, or the ethnic cleansing of Uyghur Muslims in China? On international policy issues, no, he said that's not a responsibility for the university as a whole or as an institution. But when Soller tried to apply his conviction on neutrality for the first time as president, dozens of faculty members condemned the response. Many pro-Israel alumni were outraged, and donors had a private discussion about pulling funding. And an Israeli university sent an open letter to Soller and Martinez saying, "Stanford's administration failed us." The initial statement had tried to make clear that the school's policy was not Israel-specific. It noted the university would not take a position on the turmoil in Nagorno-Karabakh, where Armenians were undergoing ethnic cleansing from the Azerbaijanis, but the message didn't get through. Soller had to be an awkward retreat or risk the exact sort of public humiliation that he, as the caretaker president, had presumably been hired to avoid. Also, think of people like Claudine Gay, the president of Penn, who was fired. This was happening, around this time, in the direct wake of October 7th. He essentially, goes through the rest of his article talking a lot about the, really, just through dogged hard work, the interview that he scored with the president there. Soller, he works closely with Martinez, Stanford's provost. I happened to interview her, too, just a few days before October 7th, not long after she'd been appointed. When I asked her about her hopes for the job, she said, "A priority is ensuring that an environment in which free speech and academic freedom are preserved." We talked about the so-called Leonard Law, a provision unique to California that requires private universities to be governed by the same First Amendment protections as public ones. This restricts what Stanford could do in terms of penalizing speech, putting it in a stricter bind than Harvard, the University of Pennsylvania, or any other elite private institutions that have more latitude to set the standards for their campus, whether or not they have actually done so. Again, so you see a little, tap, tap, wink, wink, Harvard there, get to work. So I was surprised when in December the university announced that abstract calls for genocide clearly violate Stanford's fundamental standard, the Code of Conduct for all students at the university. And again, I think there's something to do with those presidents getting fired, the conversations that Baker references earlier in this article about donors possibly having getting upset, writing letters, having less public communications and things. That could have been a bit of a situation. The statement was a response to the outrage following the congressional testimony of 3 university presidents, outrage that eventually led to the resignation of 2 of them. Who had previously held positions, Gay and McGill, who had previously held positions at Stanford, did not commit to punishing calls for the genocide of Jews. Just one of the stupidest moments in this whole situation. Just like, if someone threatens it, just be like, of course, but we don't see that on our campus. I said that at the time, it was a really just example of just piss poor, media training to the way that was just like, when you have an answer staring you, just like, have you ever watched an interview of anyone ever in your life? And again, I feel like the idea that those 2 presidents would actually, support genocide against Jews on Harvard campus, I think, or Penn campus, is crazy. When we met back in November, I tried to get Soller to open up about his experience running an institution in turmoil. What it's like to know that so many students who believe that he, a mild-mannered 71-year-old classicist who swing dances with his anthropologist wife, is a warmonger. Soller was more candid than I expected, perhaps more candid than any prominent university president has been yet. Again, so great that he got this interview. We sat in the same conference room. Pointless details. He was hunched over and looked exhausted. The fact that we're caught up in it, he said, his voice broke when he talked about the fact that we're caught up in it. Capable administrator with decades of experience. Soller almost seemed at a loss. It's kind of a roller coaster, to be honest. He said he had not anticipated the deluge of emails blaming me for lack of moral courage. And the university anything the university says seems bound to be wrong. If I say that our position is we will grieve the loss of innocent lives, that in itself will draw some hostile reactions, he said. By March, it seemed his views had solidified. He said that he knew he was a target, but he was not going to be pushed into issuing any more statements. The continuing crisis has granted him new insight. I'm certain that whatever I say will not have any material effect on the war in Gaza. And again, it's just like, to a certain extent, he's absolutely right. With that situation, it would be nice to, again, see a university that stands up when a country takes out all universities in a specific area, as Israel has done in the Gaza Strip. But, again, the true fact that, the true fact that that people probably won't be able to influence events halfway around the world is not something that, especially as an American, for reasons that I've already talked about, is not, I think, a complete justification or, fair and completely, logical explanation for being completely silent about it. But I think it is it's very, very hard. And I feel like, if it is true that they're about their divestment position, they're less complicit than other universities who do have, direct holdings in companies that have been on the BDS list, not just like Starbucks or whatever, but have been on the BDS list for a period of time. I think that is another thing. But, so here he kind of concludes, had to skip a little bit for time's purposes. For so long, Stanford's physical standoff seemed intractable. Then, in early February, a storm swept in, and the natural world dictated its own conclusion. Heavy rains flooded campus. For hours, the students battled to save their tents. The sit-in activists used sandbags and anything they could to hold back the water, and at one point, David Palumbo, the professor, told me he stood in the lashing downpour to anchor one of the sit-ins tents with his own body. When the storm hit, many of the Jewish activists had been attending a discussion on anti-Semitism. They raced back and struggled to salvage the blue and white tent, but it was too late. The wind had ripped it out of the ground. Oops, that's rough. This is pretty good here. The next day, the weary Jewish protesters returned to discover their space on the campus quad had been taken. Settled, shall we say. A new collection of tents had been set up by El Boudali, the pro-Palestinian activist, and a dozen friends. He said they were there to protest Islamophobia and teach about Islam and jihad, and that they were a separate entity from Sit-In to Stop Genocide, though I observed students cycling between the tents. Crazy. Palestinian flags now flew from the bookstore to the quad. What a tragedy. Like, that actually does make me laugh a lot. And just the framing of these, like, the evil, computer science TA that has been, that kicked the weary Jewish protesters who were trying so hard to save their tent out, and then now he's starting a, education tent to say that Muslims don't always want to kill people, and you're trying to educate people about his religion. And administrators told me they've been quickly informed by El Boudali and his allies. The space had been reserved by the Jewish advocates and offered to help him move to a different location, but the protesters told me they had no intention of El Boudali. El Boudali said that they did not take over the entire space and would have been happy to exist side by side, but they wanted to kick us off entirely from that lawn. Who said he doesn't support a two-state solution? When it was clear that the area where they'd set up tents would not be ceded back to the pro-Israel group willingly. And again, I feel like, the thing that he said, we can just share the area, I didn't take up all of it, is a perfectly reasonable thing. Stanford changed course and decided to clear everyone out in one fell swoop. On February 8th, school officials ordered all students to vacate the plaza overnight. The university was finally going to enforce its rule prohibiting people from sleeping outside on campus and requiring the removal of belongings from the plaza between 8 p.m. and 8 a.m. The order cited the danger as posed by the storm as justification for changing course, probably hoping to avoid allocations of bias, and described the decision as viewpoint neutral. That did not work. About a week of protests led by the sit-in organizers followed. Chants were chanted. More demands for a river-to-the-sea solution to the Israel problem were made. A friend boasted to me about her willingness to be arrested. Stanford sent a handful of staff members who stood near balloons left over from an event earlier in the day. They were there. One of them told me to make students feel supported and safe. In the end, Soler and Martinez agreed to talk with the leader of the sit-in about their demands to divest the university and condemn Israel under the proviso the activists comply with Stanford's anti-camping guidelines regardless of the outcome of discussions. 8 days after they were first instructed to leave, 120 days after sending camp, the long national nightmare is over, and the sit-in protesters slept in their own beds. In defiance of the university's instructions, they left behind their tents. But sometime in the early hours of the morning, law enforcement officers confiscated the structures. The area was cordoned off without any violence, and the plaza filled once more with electric skateboards and farmers markets. The conflict continues in its own way. Soler was shouted down by protesters chanting "No Peace on Stolen Land" at a family weekend event, and protesters later displayed him an effigy of him covered in blood. I feel like it was probably just, actually, no, apparently there's a link here. Let's see what it is. See how, truly ridiculous and crazy it is. Spineless Soler and Pillsbury Doughboy appear at 24th annual midnight breakfast. Again, it was a cutout with his face on it. Would like to see the picture of that, but unfortunately it's not loading. Poor guy. University president is what I would say about that. When the world is rendered in black and white, portrayed as a simple fight between colonizer and colonized, the answer is yes. Solutions by this logic are absolute. Israel or Palestine, nothing in between. Either you support the liberation of the oppressed or you support genocide. Either Stanford is all good or bad, all in favor of free speech, or all authoritarian, all anti-Semitic, or all Islamophobic. In January's anti-Semitism event, I watched an exchange between a Jewish attendee and a protester from a few feet away. Are you pro-Palestine? Again, this is the whole stupid game that they play. It's just, ugh. Are you pro-Palestine? The protester asked. Yes. The attendees responded, and then went on to describe with disgust the human rights abuses Palestinians have faced for years. And again, I think it's all very incumbent on the way he actually, did that. I'm sure they used the words, Netanyahu government were used a few times as, again, the classic liberal Zionist tendency to portray Netanyahu as the only evil that's ever been brought on the Palestinians. He says, yeah, so yes, the attendee responded and then went on to describe and discuss with human rights abuses Palestinians have faced for years. Then the protester said, but are you a Zionist? The person responded, yes. Then he said, we are enemies. With that dramatic conclusion, Theo Baker is a sophomore at Stanford and the winner of the 2022 George Polk Award in Journalism. Best journalist ever. Theo Baker walking in, got the president on speed dial. He's just that good, folks. And, he just, let this, how many words? It's got to be like 5,000 word liberal Zionist screed in the Atlantic. Just got it, completely published in. Just a completely privilege-free, hardworking person who, earned absolutely everything that he's got. So good job to Peter Baker. Good job to this amazing article that was really, informative and truly an example of great reporting and absolutely nothing else. And with that being said, on that positive note, we will be back for real on Wednesday.